Hello gentle listeners, and welcome back to Whispers of the Past. Last episode, we delved into the life and legacy of Merlin, the sorcerer whose wisdom and magic guided Arthur's rise to the throne. Today, we shift our focus from a man behind the king to the symbols that defined his reign. Two legendary swords, each with a story etched in myth and meaning. What does it truly mean to be king? Is it divine right, marked by pulling a sword from stone, or is it the wisdom and responsibility forged through trials? Chapter 1: The Weight of the Crown. Dawn broke over Camelot, casting a tapestry of gold and crimson across the sky. The city stirred below, its streets bathed in the gentle glow of morning light. Atop the castle's highest battlement stood Arthur, the newly crowned king of Britain. The sword he had pulled from a stone, its blade gleaming like a shard of captured sunlight, rested in his grip. Yet, beneath the weight of the crown and the sword, Arthur's heart was heavy with doubt. The cheers of the crowd from that fateful day still echoed faintly in his memory, a distant roar swallowed by an inner silence. Is this sword alone proof that I am worthy to be king? The question gnawed at him, more relentless than any foe he had faced. The sword was a symbol, yes, but symbols could be hollow. What truly made a king? Arthur paced the stone parapet, his fingers tracing the ornate engravings on the sword's hilt. Each step echoed with a burdened expectation. His gaze drifted across the sprawling landscape, where fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with villagers whose people now looked to him for guidance and protection. The enormity of his role pressed down like the weight of the very stone from which he had pulled the blade. From the shadows of an archway emerged Merlin, his presence as steady and enigmatic as ever. The wizard's robes whispered against the cold stone, and his eyes, sharp and knowing, held the depth of centuries. "You seem troubled, Arthur," Merlin observed, his voice a calm ripple against the tide of Arthur's thoughts. Arthur sighed, his grip tightening around the sword. "They call me a king because I pulled this from a stone. But what if that was just chance? A trick of fate? Does this blade truly make me worthy? Or am I just a boy who got lucky?" "Symbols are powerful, Arthur," he said softly. "But they are not the substance of a king. This sword, it marked you, yes. It revealed a potential. But it is not the blade that defines you. It is what you do with the power it represents." Arthur looked down at the sword, its gleaming surface reflecting not a king, but a young man searching for himself. "Then what makes a king, Merlin? If not this, then what?" Merlin's smile was faint, touched with both pride and sadness. "A king is not crowned by a sword. He is forged by his choices, tempered by his trials, and defined by his heart. The sword and the stone chose you, but Excalibur will test you." Arthur's brow furrowed. "Excalibur?" Merlin's eyes gleamed with mystery. "A sword beyond legend, one that does not grant kingship, but reflects the soul of the one who wields it. If you wish to understand what it means to be king, Arthur, you must seek it." Arthur turned back to the horizon, the rising sun now a blazing orb of fire and promise. The journey ahead was unclear, the path shadowed by doubt and uncertainty, but in his heart a spark of determination flickered to life. He had pulled a sword from stone, now he would seek one from the depths of legend, and in doing so, perhaps find the answer that no crown or blade could give. Chapter 2: The Legend of the Sword. The halls of Camelot were alive with the murmurs of courtiers and the hushed council of knights, all speaking in reverent tones about the young king and the sword that had chosen him. But within the stone walls of the great hall, where banners of crimson and gold swayed in faint draughts, Arthur sat in silent contemplation, surrounded by his most trusted knights and advisors. The sword from the stone lay before him on the ground table, its blade catching the flickering light of the torches, casting sharp reflections onto the polished wood. Sir Kay, Arthur's foster brother, leaned forward, his brow furrowed with skepticism. It's a fine sword, no doubt, but does pulling it from stone truly prove divine right? Is that enough to rule? Sir Bedivere, ever the loyal knight, countered, The legends foretold of such a sign. The sword was meant to reveal the true king. Arthur is that king, chosen by fate. Yet the room grew tense, the unspoken doubts lingering like shadows. Arthur listened, his heart heavy. The sword had made him king, but not all hearts were won by symbols alone. Merlin stood by the hearth, his staff resting lightly against the stone floor, eyes reflecting the flame's dance. The sword in the stone was never meant to answer all questions, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. It revealed potential, a possibility, but a king's worth is not carved into steel. It is written in the choices he makes, the burdens he bears. Arthur rose, his gaze sweeping across the faces of those gathered. If the sword is not enough, then I must find what is. Merlin stepped forward, his expression solemn. There is another sword, one that holds a different power. Not the right to rule, but the wisdom to lead. Excalibur. The name hung in the air, weighty and ancient. Where can I find it? Arthur asked, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Merlin's eyes darkened slightly, touched by mystery. In the lands beyond Camelot, where the veil between worlds grows thin, the Lake of Avalon. But know this, Arthur, Excalibur is not a gift. It is a test. It will not come to the unworthy. Thus began Arthur's next quest. Not for a throne, not for glory, but for understanding. He set out with Merlin, leaving the stone walls of Camelot behind, venturing into the wilds where legends breathed and magic whispered. The journey was long, marked by silent forests and mist-shrouded valleys. Arthur wrestled with his doubts under starlit skies, questioning not the path, but himself. What if he was not worthy? What if the sword and the stone had been a trick of fate, a mistake? Days turned to weeks until, at last, they reached the shores of a lake unlike any other. Its waters shimmered with an unnatural stillness, reflecting not just the sky, but something deeper, something eternal. The Lake of Avalon. As Arthur stepped closer, the surface of the water rippled without wind, and from its depths emerged a figure cloaked in water and light. The Lady of the Lake. Her presence was both ethereal and commanding, her eyes ancient, knowing. Arthur of Camelot, she spoke, her voice a melody woven with echoes of time itself. You seek Excalibur, but it is not a prize to be claimed. It is a responsibility to be earned. Arthur knelt, not out of submission, but respect. Then tell me what I must do. The Lady of the Lake raised her hand, and the waters parted, revealing a path of stone leading to a pedestal where Excalibur rested, its blade gleaming with an otherworldly light. To claim Excalibur, you must face a trial, not of strength, but of spirit. Only when you understand the true burden of a king will the sword be yours. Arthur rose, his doubts still present but no longer defining him. With each step toward the sword, he carried not the weight of expectation, but the quiet resolve of one seeking not to rule, but to serve. The trial awaited. Chapter 3. The Trial of the King. Arthur stepped onto the stone path, the cold mist of Avalon curling around his ankles like ghostly fingers. Each step echoed with a resonance that felt both distant and intimate, as though the lake itself listened. Merlin remained at the water's edge, his figure a shadow against the growing fog, offering no words, only silent support. As Arthur approached the pedestal, the world shifted. The lake and sky blurred into a tapestry of light and shadow, and Arthur found himself no longer by the water's edge, but in a vast expanse, an ethereal landscape shaped by memory and fear. Before him stood three figures, faceless yet familiar, cloaked in the fabric of his doubts. The first figure spoke, its voice a mirror of Arthur's own. "What makes you believe you are worthy to lead? You are but a boy who pulled a sword. Fate chose you, not merit." Arthur felt the sting of truth in the words. Doubts he buried surfaced, raw and undeniable, but he steadied his breath. "Fate may have chosen me, but my choices define me. I will not lead because I pulled a sword, but because I chose to stand for those who cannot." The figure dissolved into mist, leaving only two. The second figure stepped forward, its form shifting into the likeness of a fallen knight, armored and bloodied. "What will you sacrifice for your kingdom? Can you bear the cost of leadership, knowing it may break you?" Arthur's heart tightened. Faces of those he might lose flashed before his eyes. Friends, allies, perhaps even his own soul. "I do not seek sacrifice, but I will face it if I must. A king's heart must be strong, not unfeeling. I will grieve, but I will not falter." The figure faded, its echoes lingering in the cold air. The final figure emerged, cloaked in shadow, its presence oppressive. "Power corrupts. How will you wield it without becoming what you fight against?" Arthur stood tall, his voice unwavering. "By remembering that power is not mine to own. It is a trust, a duty. I will be king not to rule over, but to serve." Silence followed. Then the shadows lifted, revealing the pedestal once more. Excalibur gleaming as if the very stars had been forged into its blade. Arthur approached, his hand steady as he grasped the hilt. The sword was not cold steel, but warm with the pulse of something living, a connection not to power, but to purpose. The Lady of the Lake appeared beside him, her gaze soft yet piercing. "You have faced yourself and found not perfection, but truth. Excalibur is yours, not as a reward, but as a reminder. The burden of kingship is heavy, but you need not carry it alone." Arthur bowed his head, gratitude and resolve entwining it within him. When he turned back to Merlin, sword in hand, he was not the same man who had left Camelot. Excalibur was his, and with it, the weight of the kingdom. Chapter 4: The Return to Camelot. Arthur and Merlin journeyed back to Camelot, the landscape shifting from the mystical mists of Avalon to the familiar rugged hills and dense forests of their homeland. The sword from a stone hung at Arthur's side, but it was Excalibur, secured across his back, that seemed to carry the true weight of his journey. The blade gleamed with an otherworldly luster, even under the muted light of dawn, a symbol of a trial past and a lesson learned. As they approached the towering gates of Camelot, the guards bowed low, their eyes drawn not just to Arthur, but to the sword he bore. Word of his quest had travelled ahead of him, carried by whispers and wonder. The court assembled in the grand hall, its stone walls echoing with anticipation and doubt. Faces both familiar and skeptical awaited him. Nobles who had questioned his right to rule, knights who had yet to swear fealty, and advisors who measured a king not by legend, but by leadership. Arthur entered, his steps firm, his gaze steady. He carried both swords, the symbol of divine right and the testament of earned wisdom. Silence enveloped the hall as he approached the throne, but he did not sit. Instead, he placed the sword from the stone upon the grand table and held Excalibur aloft, its blade capturing the flicker of torchlight, casting a brilliance that seemed to pierce through doubt itself. "This sword," Arthur began, his voice resonant, "is not a token of power. It is a reminder of a burden I carry, not for myself, but for all of you. The sword and the stone chose me, but Excalibur tested me. I am not your king because of fate. I am your king because I will fight for you, bleed for you, and if need be, fall for you." The hall remained silent, not from disbelief, but from the weight of his words. Then Sir Bedivere stepped forward, kneeling, his fist over his heart. "My sword is yours, my king." One by one, the knights followed, their pledges filling the hall, a chorus of loyalty and newfound faith. Yet not all hearts were won. In the shadowed corners of Camelot, dissonance lingered. Whispers of rival claims and discontent festered, as fragile as glass, yet sharp enough to cut. Arthur felt it, not fear, but the understanding that kingship was not a crown worn, but a battle fought daily. As night fell, Arthur stood alone in his chambers, both swords before him. The sword in the stone gleamed with cold precision, a relic of destiny. Excalibur pulsed with a softer glow, a beacon of earned purpose. He stared at them, not as trophies, but as twin symbols of his journey. One chosen by legend, the other by the trials of his soul. Merlin entered quietly, his presence a comforting constant. "The throne is only the beginning, Arthur. The true test of a king is not in claiming power, but in holding it." Arthur nodded, his reflection in Excalibur's blade revealing not just a king, but a man who had faced himself and emerged stronger. Outside, beneath a moon cloaked in thin clouds, a shadow moved beyond Camelot's wall. A figure watching, waiting, a harbinger of the trials yet to come. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Future. The days following Arthur's return were filled with proclamations, feasts, and ceremonies. Knights pledged their swords, nobles offered counsel, and the people celebrated their young king, whose legend had already begun to take root in the hearts of many. Yet, amid the revelry, Arthur sensed an undercurrent of unease, like a distant storm yet to break. In the quiet hours before dawn, Arthur often found himself drawn to the battlements, gazing out over the darkened landscape. Merlin would join him, his gaze fixed on the same horizon. "Peace is fragile," Merlin murmured one morning, his voice carried softly by the chill wind. "It holds until it doesn't, and the cracks have already begun to form." Arthur turned, studying Merlin's shadowed face. "You speak as if you see what I cannot." "Not see, Arthur. Feel." Merlin's eyes, filled with the weight of unspoken knowledge, met Arthur's. "There are forces at play beyond these walls. Ambition, envy, and ancient darkness that does not rest simply because a new king holds a sword." Later that day, envoys arrived from distant territories, their words laced with diplomacy, but their eyes sharp with calculation. Among them, a figure stood apart, Morgana, a noblewoman cloaked in mystery, whose presence seemed both regal and unsettling. Her gaze lingered on Arthur with a familiarity that unsettled him. Their exchange was brief, but charged. "You carry Excalibur well, my king," Morgana said, her smile a shadow of warmth. "But a sword, no matter how mighty, cannot cut through the darkness within one's own heart." Arthur held her gaze, unflinching. Nor can it be dimmed by shadows that fear the light. As Morgana departed, Merlin watched her closely, his face darkened with concern. "Not all threats wear their intent so plainly," he whispered to Arthur. "She is more than she appears." In the solitude of his chambers that night, Arthur studied Excalibur once more. The blade reflected not just his face, but the flickering of candlelight. Like distant fires on the horizon, the future loomed, filled with battles yet to be fought, not just with sword and shield, but within the very heart of Camelot. The seeds of both greatness and ruin had been sown, and as the dawn approached, Arthur knew that his greatest trials were still to come, not in the shadows of the past, but in the battles that would shape the future of his kingdom. The legend of King Arthur was only just beginning. And so, Arthur's journey takes his first steps beyond Destiny's shadow, from a boy who pulled the sword from a stone to the king who bears Excalibur's weight. He now stands as both a symbol and a sovereign, his heart caught between the echoes of legend and the harsh truths of leadership. But a kingdom is not forged by swords alone. In our next episode, we'll witness Arthur's vision for a realm built on more than power, a kingdom shaped by ideals. Join us as we explore the rise of Camelot, the creation of a round table, the birth of the code of chivalry, where Arthur will gather knights not through divine right, but through bonds of brotherhood and honor. Yet, even as Camelot's walls rise, shadows linger at its borders. Allies may become adversaries, and the greatest threats might not come from distant lands, but from within the hearts of those closest to the throne. The legend continues, and the heart of Camelot begins to beat. Thank you for joining me on this journey so far, gentle listeners. I hope you're enjoying the tale of King Arthur so far, and will keep listening to the future episodes. If you have enjoyed it, then please like, subscribe, leave a review, or send me one to whispersofthepastreviews@gmail.com. See you next time.